This is Josh Beiser from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoy this Critical Thought, your daily discussion on game design. And be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and you can pitch future Critical Thought topics. Alright everybody, before we get started, we are finally finished with the Bloodborne videos here on the channel. Today I uploaded the remaining videos I had from the Old Hunters DLC, and we're done. No more Bloodborne for the foreseeable future. If you have any suggestions for future games to play, let me know, as I'll be starting the Bastion Let's Play probably in a few days, and of course there's the Neo play. Also, one other thing I want to ask you guys, I used a different style for the thumbnail art for the final episodes of the Bloodborne Let's Play. Instead of using my title tag to sort of, I guess, frame everything, I use scenes from the game. Let me know which style do you prefer. I like having the title on there. I think it gives like a touch of class. But I do also like having the title sort of like framed on like the left, left indent? I guess that's what it's called as well. I think it gives like a nice little different look to it compared to other videos. But let me know what you think in the comments below. For today's Critical Thought, we're going to be turning to a topic that was suggested by fan of the channel and subscriber David, and that is the difference between CRPG and WRPG. And no, that's not a typo. As the RPG genre has evolved, it's gone beyond just JRPG or Japanese role-playing games and Western WRPG or Western RPGs. There's even that divide between the old school computer CRPGs and what we have today. And there are so many parts of this that I've devised a little drinking game for today. For every time we come up with another potential topic for a future Critical Thought, please take a drink of your preferred beverage. I'm saying preferred beverage, not to encourage underage drinking, of course. And if anyone would be so kind as to notate how many drinks we have, that way we can have a grand total at the end. But let's begin. This is a really interesting topic because it really covers not only the scope of game development, but also influences crowdfunding and Kickstarter as well. When we talk about the early parts of the RPG genre, that's the CRPG. And CRPGs came into popularity during the mid-80s with a foundation based in pen and paper and especially Dungeons and Dragons style games. Take a drink here. And the original D&D and the Silent Tabletop games became the foundation for a lot of the early CRPGs in terms of the setting, the mechanics, and the systems. Several of the bigger name CRPGs at the time were the dungeon crawlers, such as Might and Magic and Wizardry. And these games were pretty much, they didn't really have a grand story for the player control. Basically, there's a bad guy, you're in a dungeon or something like that, go and kill him. And many of these early CRPGs, because of their pen and paper background, definitely got a little bit mechanic heavy. These games were built on a lot of the foundations that would become indicative of RPGs. Like we said, besides the fantasy background, there's the holy trinity of fighter, mage, healer, the idea of, again, like orcs and all that stuff, and the first-person kind of design. Now, that said, of course, there were games that bucked those trends, and I'm sure I own several of them on GOG and have not gone around to playing them. For those of you watching this who did grow up with those late 80s, early 90s CRPGs, were there any popular ones or ones that you enjoyed that weren't your typical fantasy fare? Let me know in the comments below. But at this point, the CRPG and the JRPG genre were pretty much exploring different kinds of mechanic-based design. JRPGs focus a lot on pretty much their own unique combat systems, and drawing, of course, heavy parallels to the big names at the time, Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy. While the CRPG genre focused on the pen and paper style, with a lot of advanced rules for how combat worked, defenses, and of course building your party. And I just remember, I think there was one called Betrayer of Condor? I think that's one of the games I have off of GOG. But as we entered the mid-90s, we started to see this transition, or in terms of the popular or the mainstream part of the RPG genre, we started to see this move away from first person to an isometric view. And we have games such as Fallout and Baldur's Gate as big examples of that. Now, this is when things start to really slowly but surely shift away from the old school CRPGs. One of the big parts of why the RPG genre became so popular, especially being built on pen and paper design, was the use of abstraction. Take a drink. The pen and paper games have a lot of baggage when it comes to playing them. You need a proper setup, you need the graph paper, the monster manuals, the books, etc. But thanks to the computer, that can basically handle all that stuff for you on the back end and simply leave the player to enjoying the story and playing the game. Now, with Fallout, it also made use of its own unique system with the special system for creating characters, and then Baldur's Gate, again, was still based heavily on Dungeons and Dragons. But this was the start of bringing the player into the experience. You weren't just the passive observer saying, I have to go kill this wizard and save the day. This is when we started to see the player having the ability to control how they would handle certain situations, control even the endings in some cases, and what people would follow or hate them. And this isometric style also brought a lot of other great series as well, or other big names. A really good example would be Planescape Torment. Take a drink. But that's one of those games that I actually have not had a chance to really sit down and play. As another interesting aside, this was also a time where it became popular to actually add in your own custom mods, with games such as Neverwinter Nights that had complete mod functionality, and people were able to basically add their own content to these games. Take a drink here. And this kind of ability to mod and create your own content would become a major popularity of these older titles. I know stuff like the Temple of Elemental Evil, I think, had that, and just the vast majority of those games. Now, the little company that no one's ever heard of before who made Baldur's Gate, BioWare, they of course disappeared and we never heard from them again. Of course not. But when we entered the mid-thousands, or actually early thousands, and I get to feel old again, we saw the real first major step forward in what will become modern WRPGs. And that is Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Take a drink here. And KOTOR, excuse me, is a very important game towards RPG design and BioWare's mark in the game industry. This was the first time that we really saw a popular RPG move away from the fantasy genre, and again, the foundations of pen and paper and Dungeons and Dragons. Star Wars pretty much provided a very rich canvas for BioWare to create an original story, original characters, and more importantly, an original combat system. Because we're not dealing with archers, thieves, and warriors, they had to design something original for KOTOR. And while KOTOR did have some elements of the older CRPGs, it still was very much its own original system. And this game also was the first game to really popularize morality sliders. Take a drink here, of letting the player to basically decide they want to be light side or dark side, and affect story and gameplay respect as well. Along with KOTOR, this was also where the more number crunching aspects of CRPG design started to take a backseat towards the story. Older games, again, like Maya Magic, Wizardry, Baldur's Gate, etc., had very complex combat systems due to the tactical layer and, again, the pen and paper rule set. With KOTOR, a lot of that was either removed or simply ignored. While it did have some basis of like how damage and armor worked, this was still very much more about the presentation than it is about the combat. As another interesting point, this was the first time that a major RPG had a pseudo turn-based kind of feel to it. Characters were, shooting lasers, swinging lightsabers, and all that, but it was still handled in a turn-based kind of feel, as you had to cue commands, and you were basically watching the interactions on the screen. Now, from here, we really saw the Western RPG genre really take shape around making it more about the player rather than it is about the mechanics. This was around the time that I got into the Elder Scrolls series, take a drink, and we really saw Western RPG genres grow in terms of this, again, giving the player the freedom. Now, of course, BioWare went on to make little known games such as Mass Effect, Dragon Age, etc., but we never really heard from them again as well. And when it comes to BioWare's impact on the WRPG genre, it really cannot be understated. For me, though, it really proved why I think I kind of fell out of love with WRPGs during the last decade. Because of the focus on the story over the mechanics, I really began to get back into JRPG gameplay and found multiple examples of games that really became more about the combat system, such as, of course, Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter. You can kind of take a drink, even though we've already spoiled it. It's going to be an upcoming critical thought. The World Ends With You, and so on. And as we entered sort of the back half of the thousands, or the last decade, the Western RPG genre certainly became its own unique thing. There were some notable exceptions to this, with games such as the Vampire the Masquerade series. Again, the Elder Scrolls kind of was like the middle point between the WRPG and the CRPG, and of course experimentations with series such as Borderlands, and other games adopting RPG-like mechanics. Now, with that said, of course, as we entered the end of the decade, it looked like the RPG genre was going to become mostly set in terms of this kind of BioWare styling, but there was one big change that was going to happen, and it would come from an unexpected source, an unexpected series. But I need to go get a drink, and I will be back in a second. And we're back. So as we entered the tail end of the thousands, it looked like the WRPG genre, in terms of its stylings from games like the Elder Scrolls and Mass Effect and KOTOR, was here to stay. There are still some exceptions to that, Spireweb Software being one of the more famous ones, who have been around for now over 20 years. And they were originally making CRPGs like they were back in the day, and now they've kind of become one of the few places left to provide that kind of old school, mechanic or tactical heavy titles. But keep that in the back of your mind, as we'll be coming back to that in the next and final part for today's critical thought. Now, as I was saying, there was an unexpected game that kind of came out to change how the WRPG genre was, and that was The Witcher, developed by CD Projekt. And definitely take a drink here, and also take a drink from when I just mentioned Spireweb Software as well. And The Witcher is a very unusual game in terms of its design, as it really was different from other RPGs on the market. When the game was first released, it was hammered by negative reviews due to bugs and technical issues, and it looked like CD Projekt was going to be, dead before they even got going, really. But they kept at it and released an enhanced edition of the game featuring improved UIs, bug fixes, more gameplay content, and stuff like that. And the first Witcher really did stand apart from other RPGs, including both from the WRPG and JRPG genre. The game, while it still was based in the RPG form of progression with leveling up, finding new gear, and stuff like that, it was still action-oriented, with how you had to move Geralt, doing time button presses for combat, and you also had this whole system of preparing potions and traps and gadgets and stuff like that. The game, of course, took place in the popular world from the novels, and another thing was this came out during the popularity or the heyday of the morality sliders, and The Witcher kind of ignored that in favor of a story told in shades of gray. There wasn't really any good people, it was just about trying to pick the best decision at the time. And when The Witcher was, and after the enhanced edition, The Witcher did come out well enough for them to make a sequel. And then the sequel blew everyone away. The Witcher 2 just exploded onto the scene in terms of its popularity, and it just allowed for CD Projekt to just take over. Now, this is, of course, a screenshot from The Witcher 3. And The Witcher 2, despite how everyone liked it, I really just did not enjoy that game. And definitely take a drink there, because maybe one of these days I'll have to go over it. And The Witcher 2 really grew everything from The Witcher 1. Vastly improved graphics, new combat and progression, a very in-depth story, and again, this was just a game that it really just stood apart from everything else. And in some sense, this was CD Projekt's KOTOR, if we were to compare them to BioWare. Here's my little bust of Garrett here, which you could pretty much knock someone out with this thing. And of course, from The Witcher 2 came The Witcher 3, which I have not played yet, but I have certainly read all the Game of the Years and reviews and impressions from it. And it looks like CD Projekt is here to stay with their unique stylings of RPG design. Now, with that said, we have one final topic for today, and that is where we're at now. With the rise of Kickstarter and crowdfunding, which I would say take a drink here, but we've already covered those in an earlier critical thought, so came the allure of getting back genres and types of games that we didn't see anymore. And following the gold rush period thanks to Double Fine and Broken Age, many developers saw this as a chance to see if there was a market for old school CRPGs. And we saw stuff like Pillars of Eternity, Divine Divinity, I think 3, and I'm sure there's even more classic RPGs from the platform that I'm either forgetting or haven't heard of. For those of you watching this, were there any crowdfunding-based CRPGs that you guys really enjoyed for that return to classic form? Please let me know in the comments below. And of course, we can even talk about a sort of cross between old and new with a game like The Darkest Dungeon. But again, I'm sure we've already talked about that multiple times here. But with Kickstarter and crowdfunding, this was once again the chance to see if the CRPGs could stand here today with the rise of modern ones. And it looks like it is very much the case, thanks to the several successes, and of course, what we've been seeing with more games being crowdfunded and being developed today. Now, some interesting footnotes when we talk about these kinds of transitions. As we said earlier, during the rise of the WRPG genre the last decade, we even saw stuff from Japan that were trying to mirror the old school games. One of my favorite series, Etrian Odyssey, was basically a JRPG take on Wizardry, and was their attempt at bringing back that dungeon crawling combat and design. Then there's, of course, Legend of Grimrock, which came out a few years ago. But to wrap things up, as we're sitting here today, it's very much the WRPG genre is here to stay. As we are talking right now, I think we're about a month away from the next Mass Effect, which I'm sure no one will ever buy and it will just disappear very quickly. But in terms of going back to the old school, I'm thinking that that's going to be mainly relegated to the indie and crowdfunding markets. But it's going to be interesting to see if there is enough interest from those markets, if a developer like BioWare or CD Projekt or someone else will try to make an old school CRPG. Speaking of CD Projekt, they are of course working on Shadow Cyberpunk or something like that. I think they're working on that kind of game next. And I'm sure there's probably going to be another Witcher at some point. But for those of you watching this, are there any modern WRPGs or CRPGs that you're really excited about in the future? Again, it's become sort of like this three-man race between JRPGs versus WRPGs, and now WRPGs versus CRPGs. And for those of you watching as well, what do you prefer? Modern-day WRPGs, which have eschewed or have pushed away from mechanic-heavy titles or mechanic-heavy designs for more of a player customization or a story focus? Or do you like the older games, which were more about the tactical elements and the combat systems, as opposed to, a very deep, engrossing story, other than there's a bad guy in a castle over there, go and kill him. So with that said, thank you so much for watching today's Critical Thought. I hope you enjoyed everything. And I hope this didn't run too long. If you haven't catched or caught the rest of the Bloodborne plays, be sure to check that out because I am done. We're not doing that for a while. And be sure to like and subscribe and all that great stuff. So, until tomorrow, I'm Josh Beiser from GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games daily. Be sure to check back every day for more great content, and I'll see you all next time. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBeiser for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBeiser for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.